I'm your host, Jason Tartick, and welcome to Trading Secrets. We talk all things money on this podcast, and we're teaching all the stuff we just weren't taught in the classroom. Nothing supports this show more than liking, commenting, and of course, subscribing. Welcome back to another episode of Trading Secrets. Today, we are joined by author and entrepreneur Sahil Bloom. Having spent 7 years working as a private equity investor, Sahil transitioned to an entrepreneurial career path by starting SRB Holdings, a personal holding company composed of 10 cash-flowing businesses, and SRB Ventures, a $10 million venture investment firm committed to investing in and accelerating startups around the world. One of his top business endeavors, Sahil captivates his millions of followers every week through his biweekly newsletter, the Curiosity Chronicle, which gives subscribers a deep dive that covers topics ranging from growth and decision-making to business, finance, startups, and technology. I mean, that is Trading Secrets A to Z right there. On top of it all, he has now debuted shortly here his nonfiction book, The 5 Types of Wealth, a transformative guide to design your dream life. If you're listening to YouTube or watching right now, you can see his book and wait to the end because we are giving 5 pre-orders away. All right. Let's do it, man. We've been waiting for a while. Sahil, thank you so much for being on Trading Secrets.
Thank you for having me, man. This is a thrill to get to do it in person, too.
It's been a long time coming.
It has been a long time coming.
You're killing it. On all social media platforms, you're killing it. I have so many things to talk to you about, but let's start with this. This is a quote from you. We have been lied to believe that money is the only type of wealth. Now, of course, on Trading Secrets, we talk all about financial transparency and we talk money. And then I also heard on your podcast, your number one intention is to recognize time as the most important asset, not money. So talk to me a little bit about that intention.
Your scoreboard is broken, or at least incomplete. And, you know, this is a realization that took me 30 plus years to figure out, I would say, in my own life. And what it fundamentally comes down to is that the things you measure end up being the things that you optimize around. There's this famous quote, Peter Drucker, management theorist, said, "What gets measured gets managed." And it's the whole idea that the thing that you measure ends up being the thing that you focus on. It's the thing that you narrowly hone in on and optimize your whole life around. Money has exclusively been the way that we measure our lives historically. And that's partially because it's so easily measured. It's a single number that you can place next to your name. As a result, it has sort of become our de facto default life scoreboard, if you will. It's the way that we think of measuring our lives. We take a single number and apply it to who we are as humans. And unfortunately, money is only one piece of the broader puzzle of winning this life war that we're all fighting, which is about happiness and fulfillment and achieving the joy that we're all after. And so when I set out on this journey, if you will, over the last few years, it was really to try to understand if there was a better, more complete scoreboard, a better way to measure all of the right things that contribute to that life of fulfillment. And then as a result, if you measure the right things, you'll take the right actions and then create the right outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like because you're in venture capital, you're PE, the whole idea behind that, right, is optimizing the businesses to build them up and hopefully exit them. It feels like what you've done is this philosophical journey of optimizing your life in ways that we're taught to do almost like the opposite of. So it's like you're finding different efficiencies in which we weren't directed towards those ways.
Yeah, I think that's true in some sense. And look, what I'm saying is that if you just accept blindly the definitions of success that the world hands you, you will never feel successful until the moment you define what success looks like to you. And by chasing everyone else's definitions of success, you're sort of setting yourself up for failure because you're just going to be convinced that there's another more that you need to achieve. We've all experienced that, right? Where like you say early in your career, oh, once I make $1 million, then I'm going to be set. Life is going to be good. I'm great. You get to $1 million. And then suddenly you're like, oh, actually 3, actually 5, actually 10, whatever. The number just keeps shifting and you don't find that lasting fulfillment that you were looking for. And like, this has actually been studied. Michael Norton, this professor at Harvard Business School, did this famous study where he went and asked a bunch of high net worth people worth from $1 million on through $100+ million. How happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Then he asked, how much more money would it take for you to be a 10?
Okay.
And across the board, whether they were worth $1 million or $100 million, everyone said they needed 2 to 3 times as much money.
Mhm.
So it makes no sense, but that's the path that we all find ourselves on if you exclusively define your worth around money.
I love it. So if there are people that are listening to this right now that do find as though they're chasing money as their identity, what advice do you have for them?
Start to measure the broader set of principles that we're talking about here.
Okay.
You mentioned at the outset this intention that I established for 2025 to appreciate time as my most precious asset. That's where all of this begins. You are very much a billionaire in one particular sense, which is you are a time billionaire. The asset that you have the most of is time. I go to young people all the time, and they're all obsessed with making a whole lot of money. And you ask them, would you trade lives with Warren Buffett? And I asked this to you, like, would you trade lives with Warren Buffett?
No.
He's worth $130 billion, right? He has access to anyone in the world. He flies around on private jets. He's got houses all over the place. He reads and learns for a living. You wouldn't trade lives with him.
Very inspired by him. I want to learn from him. I think he's great, but I would never want to trade lives.
Because he's 95 years old, right? Like, there's no way you would trade the amount of time you have for $130 billion.
Totally.
So you know in the back of your mind that time has incalculable value. And yet, on a daily basis, how often do you disregard the value of your time? We sit here on our phones, scrolling around, looking at other people's lives, doing nonsense. You know, we waste energy on stupid things, chasing around little opportunities, and we're disregarding the fact that time is our most precious, valued asset.
Interesting. I like that idea of you thinking about 1 billion seconds equaling like a net worth for someone based on their age. So that's a new way to look at it. Like, look at your age, look at life expectancy, add a couple 10 years because you're healthy, listen to this, and then think about that. That's like your new net worth. That's a new way to look at time, is your net worth and that you have in seconds left, as opposed to what your actual net worth is.
Exactly. I mean, 1 billion seconds is roughly 30 years. So if you're 20 listening to this right now, you have, 2.5 billion seconds if you're lucky. If you're 50, you might have, 1.5 billion if you're really lucky.
I like it. It's a good philosophy, but I also think through money, we could learn a lot of lessons, right? And we could learn lessons like that you're teaching us right here. I was reading a little bit, and people want to know how you got your start and how you got to where you are. And you have had massive growth, specifically in Twitter, which is so different than people that actually come on this show. You've had great growth elsewhere too, but it seems like your writing is what's really taken off. And there was an interview you did that you said that your Curiosity Chronicles newsletter is bringing in about 70K a month. So is that number accurate? How many subscribers do you have? Talk to me a little bit about the newsletter.
Yeah. Newsletter now brings in north of 100K a month.
We see numbers in all different areas. A newsletter doing 100K a month is unbelievable.
Newsletters are incredible businesses, and people actually don't appreciate this. And for anyone out there that's listening, I actually think newsletters are a massively under-penetrated industry and an opportunity. And I think you can approach it from a variety of vectors. Like, I obviously have a self-improvement newsletter.
Yeah.
It's probably pretty hard to start a general self-improvement newsletter today and get it to scale. There's a lot of them now. I sort of started it in 2021. There was less. It was earlier on in the curve. But I think there are incredible businesses to be built in the local newsletter business. Like, I just actually met a friend who started a local Franklin, Tennessee newsletter.
No way.
That's making like 10K a month after 6-9 months of starting this thing. You're like building it up. It becomes local news. You're getting local businesses to sponsor it. There's really interesting businesses that can be built around newsletters.
Interesting. Talk to me about your structure. Did you first build credibility on Twitter, and then from Twitter, you brought that audience into your newsletter?
Yeah, I have zero credibility on TikTok. No dancing.
We're almost all out there.
Yeah, you wouldn't want me to dance. Yes. So on Twitter, I originally in 2020, I was a vice president at a private equity fund. So I was making a bunch of money. I was doing quite well. I was miserable, and there was a lot of other areas of my life that were really suffering, but I was doing well in the money game. And I got stuck at home because of COVID, like everyone else. And so I had all this time on my hands. I started writing on Twitter, had 500 followers at the time. I started writing. I was kind of the first person that started writing threads, which have now sort of become a meme. Yeah. At the time, they were just an underpenetrated, it was like, the principle on life here is to identify the mispriced opportunities, like opportunities that aren't, fairly priced. Same as like you try to pick a stock that is opportunities in businesses can be mispriced. And so threads were like a mispriced opportunity. You were generating outsized growth for the same amount of input. And I used threads really effectively to drive owned subscribers to my newsletter. So, I'd write a thread and then at the bottom, it was like, if you want to go deeper on this topic, I'm going to write about it on my newsletter, subscribe here. And so you were getting a really, really high rate of opt-in in those early years into an owned audience rather than one that just existed on the platform.
Okay. And then for people wondering, okay, you build your subscriber base. How do you actually make money? Talk to people about how you monetize a newsletter.
Yeah, mine is pretty simple, which is just sponsorships. So every newsletter has a single sponsor that goes out in it. And, that rate has increased as the subscriber base has increased. So now the subscriber base is a little north of 800,000 people globally. And obviously, CPMs, like it depends on where the subscribers are, but, being well over 50% US and it's, a more like professional audience, like you end up getting a pretty good rate relative to other things.
Pretty cool. Clearing 7 figures a year off a newsletter. And how big is your team? And are you writing the newsletter yourself?
I write the newsletter myself. I do all of my creative work myself. My whole goal in general from a structural standpoint at my holding company level is that like I basically get to spend 99% of my time on creative things, which is what I really enjoy doing, what I'm good at. And then there are people that handle everything else. So, anything that's like back end operations, logistics, like with the newsletter, there's a lot of segmentation, funneling, the sponsor stuff, like all of those things get handled by a team. I have a chief of staff or president who sort of oversees everyone underneath that. And then there's, various junior people, researchers, things like that.
Very cool. So I love how we did start the podcast with the idea of like, we're told money is the only type of wealth and how you were stuck in a position where that's kind of what was consuming you into where you are today, motivating so many people to get out of that mindset. Talk to me about this though. Stanford grad, you get into private equity, you're making a bunch of money. Now you're in your own space where you have a venture firm and you're doing newsletters and social media and you have your first book coming out. When you look at the revenue sources based on where you've been and where you are you making more now than you would have if you stayed on that private equity, money hungry, like driven path that was consuming you?
My income is definitely higher.
Okay.
I would say my risk-adjusted long-term wealth is probably lower. I would guess, just given I'm so energized by the things I'm doing, that I'll end up making more going down this path. But like private equity is probably the single highest risk-adjusted net worth creation path that you can follow as a human being. I mean, like if you end up joining like and doing pretty well and you become a partner at one of these places, your odds of making somewhere like $30+ million net worth are very, very high. Just the math of how carried interest works. And if you're at $1 billion+ fund, that will likely happen. But income wise, you're much more tied in those worlds to like long-term 7+ year vested carry over long periods of time. And so from an income standpoint, I'm definitely making more now.
Okay. So
across the business.
I have to drill into this a little bit because we've had all different people, all different industries. We had Todd Graves selling chicken tenders worth $9.2 billion, but we actually haven't had anyone ever that's touched the PE space.
Oh, wow.
So can you give, for people that are listening back at home, you go to Ivy League, you're at Stanford, you graduate, you get into the PE space. Around how much are you make in base salary? What's the bonus potential? And then just kind of walk through to our listeners what that career track could look like when you're speaking about some of the upside of 30+ million in net worth.
Yeah. And by the way, I ended up stepping off the track. I think it's an incredible track for early in your career. And if you love it, it's an incredible track for your whole career. If you get a ton of energy out of it, which a bunch of my friends who stayed did. And this is fun because I've never really gotten to talk about this. So early on, when you start out, like analyst associate roles are somewhere in the ballpark of like between probably 120 to 200K base salary, depending on the size of the fund. So the way these like brackets always get broken up is by the size of the fund, because for those aren't familiar, private equity fund, the way they make money is really in two ways. One is a percent of the money they're managing just as an annual fee. So typical is 2% of AUM. So like if you're a $1 billion fund, you have 20 million in fees just coming into the firm to pay their employees every year. And then they make like 20% of the profits they generate for their investors. So it's an incredible business model. But a $1 billion fund can pay you less than a $10 billion fund as a result.
Sure.
So say somewhere in the ballpark of 120 to 200, and then probably another like 100K bonus on top of that. So you might be making like, 250 to 350 all in. And
right out
like,
of school.
Yeah, probably 200
Yeah.
straight out of school if you're like an analyst. And then if you're an associate, which is really the first role where people enter, it's probably more like 300 to 400.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. But people back home, if you don't know this, because it's so competitive, you're 21 years old, you're working in private equity, making 200-300 grand a year. The interview process and the entire just competitive landscape to get in it's barbaric, right? So talk and paint the picture a little bit about how hard it was to land one of those jobs.
Yeah, barbaric is a great term for it. I mean, you are, in a lot of these really highly competitive private equity funds, like a Blackstone, KKR, some of the biggest funds that you've heard of, Carlyle. It is, a long, arduous process of both behavioral and then what they call case interviews. So the case interviews are grilling you on business understanding, on, doing math on the fly, on your modeling competency, like actually doing Excel financial models, and it can be multiple rounds, and you're going up against some of the most competent people in those realms.
Sure.
And, what I would say is if you want to stand out in those interview processes, it's the combination of EQ and IQ that makes you successful in private equity for the long run.
Sure.
As an analyst associate, just being like high IQ actually is quite effective.
Yeah.
You just need to be able to churn out models. You need to be able to work 80 to 100 hour weeks without complaining.
Computer jockey.
Exactly. I mean, model jockeys that you can do well, but you're probably not going to build a partner track career being just that, because it becomes much more about relationship development, LP relationships. You need to understand how to sell. You need to be able to pitch yourself to prospective investments, et cetera. So making sure that you stand out on the behavioral interviews to explain more about who you are, what motivates you, why you're a great teammate, those kind of things really help.
Okay. And then you're talking about the associate level, 300 to 400. Walk me through VP partner, what it looks like for people back at
typical
home.
VPs in private equity will make, order of magnitude $500,000 to $750 probably in cash comp at a bigger fund. And partners are making $1 million plus.
Okay.
Junior partners probably in the like low million and then on up from there.
Okay. I love it. So now you guys hear a little bit of his background, where you've come from. I mean, brilliant education, but you went from that world, which again is so cutthroat, so competitive. It's very linear. To then, like today I was on your Instagram and I'm doing some research about some of the theories and philosophies, which are all of them. I'm like, these are great. But there's the help, hug, or herd theory. We're going to get into that. But when someone's hearing, you come up with the help, hug, or herd theory. And then also in this space with the sharks, was there some type of breaking point personally? Did you hit rock bottom in a place that you never expected to make this type of transition? Or, how do you go from that to this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the most common pushback that I hear when I go talk about these concepts is, like easy for you to say after you've made money, right? Like, oh, it's another guy that made money telling us money doesn't matter, which is like this meme, right? It's like this common thing. And I'm actually not saying money doesn't matter. I'm nowhere in the book, nowhere in anything that I say am I going to tell you that money doesn't matter, or that you should go give up your worldly possessions and live in the Himalayas, whatever, meditating for 12 hours a day. I like money. Like I like having nice things.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it can't be the only thing that you focus on. And in my own life, my own experience, that was what happened to me. I became so narrowly focused on money being the sole driver of my contentment and happiness that I lost sight of everything else in my life. Truly had blinders on. And I thought I didn't want kids because I thought it was a distraction to making money. I started to see relationships suffering. I was living 3,000 miles away from my parents, from my sister. Our relationships had ground to a halt. My wife and I were struggling to conceive at the time. That was causing strain. I was drinking 7 nights a week. Physical and mental health were all over the map. I was overweight. And on the surface, you would have been like, I'm winning the game, right? I was making more and more money. I was getting promoted, while under the surface, all of these things were falling apart. And so it all came to a breaking point for me in May of 2021. I went out for a drink with this old friend and he asked how I was doing. And I told him that it had started to get tough being 3,000 miles away from my parents who were getting older, super, super close with them. And they had started to show their mortality. They were slowing down. And he asked how old they were. And I said mid-60s. And he said, how often do you see them? And I said, about once a year. And he just looked at me and said, okay, so you're going to see them 15 more times before they die. And I remember feeling like I was just punched in the gut. I mean, the idea that the amount of time you have left with the people you care about most in the world is so finite, so countable that you can put it onto a few hands, just shook me to the core. And the next day I told my wife that I thought we needed to make a change. And within 45 days, I had left my job. We had sold our house in California and we'd moved across the country to live closer to our parents.
Wow.
And that spark, that change was really the catalyst for everything that has followed in the last several years. It was reframing and reprioritizing the things that we truly valued, the things that we cared about. And so that's what all of this is about. It's take the time to think about what you truly want, what your true north really is, and then go take the actions to actually build your life around that.
Yeah. Some of the concepts you're talking about are, I mean, they're brilliant. They're deep. They're so real. When any one of us hears the idea of, I see my parents for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that's 24 more times, I mean, that makes the hair on my, arm stand up. So I'm with you there. And I do think that people that hear everything you're saying also are going to say, nod their head the whole time. Like, yes, yes, yes. The thing I think people really struggle with, though, is not hearing and agreeing, but actually acting. And so the concept of within how many days did you say it was?
45 days.
45 days, you leave a job that's paying, close to what, $500,000 a year to be closer to parents and start tweeting. Like it is so, and obviously it's worked out unbelievably for you. But I think where people really struggle isn't the concept of saying, I hear it, I understand it. It's the concept of actually driving the change and doing it. And so someone who did take a massive leap of faith, what do the people that are listening right now that really just struggle with doing it? How do you just do it? How do you actually get it done?
So two things I would say here. Number one, I took a massive leap of faith. You don't have to take a massive leap of faith. You can take a couple of tiny actions. And that leads to point two, which is when it comes to your financial wealth, you know something very clear, which is that if you invest $100 today, that's going to compound positively into your future. And you know that investing $100 today is better than investing $0 today. Mm-hmm. And that anything above zero will compound. So frankly, if you could only invest 10 today, you should invest 10 today. That same rule applies to all of these areas of life. You don't need to take a dramatic change in any of these areas. You just need to do one tiny thing. You just need to take one small action that will compound in the exact same way. Sending the one text, calling your mom, rather than not doing that, is going to compound positively in the relationship. You don't need to quit your job, move 3,000 miles across the country, and completely dramatically shift your whole life. You just need to do the one small thing in all of these areas. And the book is filled with actual ways that you can go and do that, real actions that you can start, and you can build the momentum on the back of those. But anything above zero compounds. We need to recognize that in these other areas of life just as much as we already understand it in the financial wealth area.
It makes perfect sense. And like areas that we do understand in the financial wealth area, like the most basic 101 is your snowball method of repaying debt, right? As far as the analytics, the numbers, that doesn't make sense as the best way to pay down your debt. But what it does make sense is momentum and behaviors, right? And I think that's precisely what's happening. Baby steps. You don't have to take that monumental change. You can make a baby step. It'll create this momentum, and then you can make big changes in your life. Let's transition to a little bit about the book. Now, when you get book questions, they're going to be a little different than this. I'm going to ask you the normal book questions, but I also got to ask you the money questions. That's what we do on Trading Secrets. Beautiful book. I love the cover. The five types of wealth. The first thing I got to ask you, I saw it on your Instagram. Holy shit, these endorsements on the back. You got Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, Susan Cain, #1 New York Times bestseller. We all know who Susan is. Arthur Brooks, Harvard professor, another New York Times bestseller. Mel Robbins, everyone knows her. Andrew Huberman. I mean, these are five powerhouses. So the trading secret question I have for you, did you pay for any of these? And I love the lab. It's awesome. And if not, how the hell do you get the CEO of Apple and some of these other heavy hitters to endorse your book?
I don't think you can pay for endorsement. Maybe there is a market for paying for endorsements. My guess is the people you would want to pay for endorsements are not viable by endorsements. And so it would be like adverse selection. No, I didn't pay. Tim Cook, I've been very fortunate to have as a mentor and friend in my life for 10 plus years now.
How do you find Tim Cook as a mentor?
We originally met at the gym at 4:45 in the morning when I first started my first job.
There's a trading secret. Get to the gym early.
I mean, in all seriousness, seriousness, it is, look, it's engineered serendipity, right? It's like you're manufacturing luck. I started my first job in 2014 working at that private equity fund. And, I needed to get to the gym super early if I was going to still work out, because my days were going to be from like 6:30 to 8:30. And so I got to the gym at 4:45 every single day for 6 months or so. Same group of 6 or 8 people that are there every day, started becoming friendly with all the other people. It turned out one of them was the new CEO of Apple at the time, Tim Cook. He became a friend, mentor, started kind of seeking him out for different career advice, things I was working on. And he's ended up being an incredible supporter on the journey. He was one of the big reasons I actually had the courage to leave my prior job and go down this path that I'm on.
I like it. Engineered luck. That's a little thing. I like that. It reminded me instantly. You told me that story. It reminded me this one time grew up with Rob Gronkowski. We stayed at his house. It was Friday night. We were like, let's go out. He's like, no, we're going to stay in. We're going to get a good lift tomorrow. Saturday night, we'll go out. We stayed in. We were at the gym at like 6 a.m. Some guy walks in and he was all excited about it, but it looked like a kid. Like I was like, what are you freaking out about? And it was Robert Kraft's grandson. And he's like, dude, this is great. He's going to go back. He's going to tell everyone that I was here at 6 a.m. Engineered luck. It's good stuff. What a great mentor to have. Amazing endorsements. All right. Talk to me about the book deal. How did the book deal come to fruition? Was it a publisher? Did you self-publish? Talk to me just a little bit about the business behind the book before we get into what the book's about.
Yeah, books as a business are interesting. The traditional model of publishing is basically like a venture fund, actually. So the publishers spray out advances to go and acquire books. And then basically what they assume is that 90% of those will never earn out, meaning like the book will never return the advance in terms of the sales that makes. But a few of them will end up being the like Atomic Habits, where they sell 10 million copies and make tons and tons and tons of money. So it's really like a venture fund for them. I sold the book in 2022, fall of 2022. I had the idea originally in fall of 2021, just over 3 years ago. Wrote the proposal in 2022, had an agent. We went out and marketed it. It's similar to selling your company. Like you go out and have meetings, you pitch people on it, why you can sell it, why you are qualified to write this book. And then they all bid on it. And like, it's like an auction process. And you could just choose the highest bidder, or you can kind of pick on the basis of like where you felt they understood the vision most. But I ended up selling the US part of the deal, which is North America rights, to Penguin Random House. And then I did a separate deal in the UK, which is all international English, to HarperCollins.
Very nice. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
You did 2 different publishers based on the
2 totally separate auctions. Yeah, you end up getting significantly more money if you do 2 separate deals. You also get more attention from each. So I had like a really premium deal from a financial standpoint in both markets. At the time when I sold the book deal, I already had a pretty big newsletter audience, which is a big lever that they think about when
you use that as a huge analytical or
huge tool. I could project out the growth of it, what it was going to be by the time I was selling the book, and that people would buy it, etc. And what happens is, like, if you have one publisher that has all global rights, sometimes you can kind of get lost in the mix, and like the book might not get really premium retail wins in the UK, even if it's doing really well here. And as a result of doing the 2 separate, like, I've gotten a whole bunch of attention from both, and so you get, like the book will be in a bunch of airports and train stations all across the UK on launch, here as well. Like, it'll be in Target and all these like airports and stuff. It's really cool in terms of optimizing around that.
Yeah, it's really, so we've talked very openly about the book process through my books on this podcast, and we've had other authors on, and then someone also that runs a talent management company. We're seeing so many now creators, and let's call them public figures, that are doing books. But even in talking to book agents, Courtney, little shout out, Levine Greenberg Rosen, they've done some big books, Giselle's book, Tom Brady's book. They're not seeing people that have social media analytics actually be able to convert with book buying. So it's interesting to hear that with a newsletter, and they can see the click-through rate, that they're putting such a premium on that. So to hear that you're going to be in Targets already and in airports is a huge indicator for what they believe is going to happen, which from everything I've seen is quite rare because of the venture model. Because 10 books, you put 10 deals on the table, 9 of them flop. Gil, let me ask you this. Gil, we'll play a little game here between it. Advance over under 350K.
Over.
Let's go. That's huge.
Yeah, it was a 7-figure deal.
Hell yeah. That is
Yeah,
unbelievable.
it was a great outcome. It's also, look, it also depends on the scope of the book. So like, this is a very much a like broad mass demographic idea. So it can appeal to, like, you could be 18 years old, just graduating high school, or a 90-year-old, and you'd read the book and find value in it. And that was a big part of my pitch, was like selling that idea that the demographic reach is huge, where most books will have like a core, demographic band that it appeals to. Like, personal finance books, it's mainly a male buyer from like, 25 to 45. And this will appeal to that person because there is stuff around financial wealth building. But there's also, things that will appeal to like a middle-aged woman or an old man or a young person. Like it's a little bit all over. And so that really helped in terms of marketing it.
Okay. Based on everything I know about you, everything I've heard from you, and hearing that, I am going to make the prediction that The 5 Types of Wealth is an instant New York Times bestseller. You got the right people behind you, and you obviously have the right credibility within what you're writing about. So let's quickly talk about that. We talked about time being an asset that's much more valuable than money, but there are 4 other types of wealth that you speak about in this book in depth. You have social, physical, mental. We already talked about time and physical. So walk me through, if my listeners right now, there's a million people selling books. Tell them why. What do these 5 types of wealth mean to them? And if they pick up the book and read it, like, what is the big differentiator in this book?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that you need to know when you pick up the book is that it's structured very different from most self-improvement books or books in these categories, which is it has all of the kind of theory and ideas and storytelling. But then at the end of each section, one for each type of wealth, it actually has a guide that are filled with, the proven science-backed strategies for actually building that type of wealth into your life. So the whole idea is that you gather the information, but then you can very quickly actually go and act on that information right now. So to the point on building a little bit of momentum, you should be armed with the information and the action steps to go and create that momentum. We talked about time wealth. Time wealth starts with the awareness, the things we talked about. Time wealth is all about the freedom to choose how you spend your time, who you spend it with, where you trade it for other things, and unlocking that in your life. And the strategies for doing that are essential to building a wealthy life. No, everyone thinks that money buys freedom, but that's not really true. I have plenty of friends who make tons and tons of money and have no freedom because they're trapped on a treadmill. They're not actually able to leverage their money and design their life in a way that is conducive to the freedom that they thought it would buy. Mm-hmm. So doing that, understanding that along the way is really important. The time wealth section will help with that. Social wealth, this is all about your relationships, the people in your life, and how to go and build strong bonds with people across the different seasons of your life. Social wealth is so important because there is clear scientific evidence that the people you surround yourself with determine your outcomes. The Pygmalion effect is this psychological and behavioral phenomenon that shows that we actually rise to the level of expectations that others have for us. So if you surround yourself with people who believe you are capable of more, who encourage you to think bigger, who push you to grow, you will actually rise to the level of those expectations. So what better reason to choose wisely in terms of who you have in that circle? Mental wealth is all about purpose. It's all about growth. It's about being able to create space in your life to actually zoom out and think about some of the bigger picture questions. That could come from religion, could come from spirituality, it could come from meditation. But the important point is that you are able to see yourself as kind of the hero in your own hero's journey. You're able to engage with that purpose on a daily basis, connect to it in some way. Physical wealth, your health and vitality. You're a young, fit guy, like being able to invest on a daily basis in the controllables to continue to fight against that natural decay and atrophy that you're going to experience, and the strategies for actually doing that. And, Andrew Huberman on the back cover of the book, like that was a big reason why I was working with him and others on actually creating some of these strategies and the plans that are involved in the book. Really, really important. And then financial wealth, the one thing that I'll say here is the nuance to how I think about financial wealth is that it is grounded around this concept of identifying what your enough life looks like. The idea of what your version of enough really is. Because in the absence of an understanding of what enough is, you just keep chasing more for the sake of more. And that chase is what leads people off the cliff. It's what leads people into that rich yet miserable existence that we've seen so many people we know fall into.
So many. I mean, unbelievable topics to cover there, all pertinent to just living a healthy and happy life. But with that last topic, I do think that's one that connects a lot to our audience. The idea of when is enough enough. Give us a little bit more, pull it back for us. So what are some things you would prescribe for people that are trying to figure out what enough is to them?
Yeah. One of my favorite stories is story of the fisherman and the investment banker.
Yeah,
Have you ever heard
yeah,
that? It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I talk about it in the book, and the whole idea is like this banker comes down and prescribes this whole, set of actions to this fisherman who is already living his version of enough. He's living his beautiful life. And the point with the idea of enough is it is unique to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about me telling you, hey, you have enough. It's not about anyone telling you that. It's about you deciding what that looks like. What most people do is they set it as a number. They say like, oh, $10 million. Okay, that's enough for me.
Sure.
But they have no idea what that means, like what that life actually looks like. I think about when I was starting out, I had no idea. What does my life look like if I have $10 million? I don't know. I don't have it clearly in mind. It's much more effective if you actually visualize what the life looks like when you have enough. Where are you? Where are you living? Do you have multiple houses? Do you, what kind of car are you driving? Why do you care about these things? Are you married? Do you have children? Are you able to go on vacations? Like, what does the actual life look like? And truly visualizing that. And the reason that's important is because then as you get close to that life and as you start building and you are close to being there, any upward movement of it starts to be more of a rational conscious movement versus an irrational subconscious one.
Right.
Numbers are prone to the irrational subconscious. You get to 10 million and now you're like, oh, yeah, I really could use 30. 30 seems nice. Because you start hanging out with people that have 30. Sure. You start just doing it naturally in your brain.
That's how you got there, right?
Exactly.
Surrounding yourself by people.
And if you do, so the one last thing I'll say to that is, there's nothing wrong with chasing more as long as it's grounded in something more important than just money. The people that have made the most money in the world, all of the billionaires you read about, they were not doing it because of the money. The money was a byproduct of the fact that they really cared about the purpose that they were trying to create. Elon Musk has not made $1 trillion by trying to make more money. He's made $1 trillion because he's trying to create a, post-Earth society. And he's building a whole lot of companies that have a lot of value as a result. And he's capturing a portion of the value.
Right.
And so I think that gets lost in discussions around money. And I talk about it in the book that the only way to make money is to create an immense amount of value for others. You create value and then you receive value in return. And that, with young people in particular, gets lost in the mix. All you have to think about is identify a problem, create a solution, and then scale that solution. The more scalable the solution, the more money you'll make.
Right. All right. There you guys have it right there. There's a 101. You don't even have to go to college and take out $50,000 a year.
Probably would save money.
You would save a lot there. All right. All of these types of wealth are critical, right? Time, social, mental, physical, and financial. The question I got for you is the intertwining of all of them, right? So we know that, I wrote a book about love and money. We know that if you want to stay physically in shape, that is going to take time away from what could also be your social wealth, which is relationships. So when these things all intertwine, how do you actually manage them for the best case scenario of your wealth? Just a basic example is the many complications of love and money, but, also within your book, you have time, mental, and physical wealth. How do you manage the intertwining worlds of all of these?
It's a perfect question. The concept that I raise in the book is this idea that your life has seasons, and what you focus on or prioritize during any one season can and will change. So you will have seasons when you are focused on building financial wealth, when it is the priority, especially in your 20s and early 30s, great time to be focused on that. You will have seasons when social wealth becomes a priority. You have young kids, you're building your relationships, doing that. You may have seasons when you're refocused on finding your purpose, on engaging in your health, all of these different things. The important point is that in any one season, you may be focused on one thing, but you don't want to turn off the other things. Okay. So I may in my 20s be really prioritizing building financial wealth. I cannot have everything else switched off in my life.
True.
Because it becomes very, very difficult to turn things back on. As you get older, if you've allowed your physical health to completely atrophy for the first 50 years of your life, it is very difficult to turn it back on.
Yeah.
So I talk about these ideas as existing on a dimmer switch. Just because financial wealth is turned all the way up doesn't mean you flip off the others. They just need to be low on the dimmer switch, with the idea being what we said before, which is anything above 0 compounds positively. So while you're prioritizing one, you're still allowing others to stack wins, even if they're smaller.
I like it. So keep them, don't turn any of them off. Keep them dim. Figure out what your priority is, but focus on all of them.
Exactly.
I like that. One thing I got to get from you before we wrap is, I talk a lot about sleep here, and I know you did 3 nighttime habits, one of your reels that popped off. And then as you're describing the book, I just turned to one page. It's chapter 25, the Physical Wealth Guide. It has precisely what you said about like the actual rules for sleep and recovery. So talk to me a little bit about your 3 nighttime habits and any type of sleep recommendations you have for us.
Yeah, there's a few, because I have been a bad sleeper for most of my life, and these few simple changes really changed my life. So the first one is, before you go to bed, write down the 2 to 3 top priority items for the next morning.
Okay.
The reason that's super helpful is because you close these open loops that are sitting out in your mind. So if you go to bed without having prepped for the next morning, your morning is definitely going to be less productive because you have friction in the morning, but also you have these open loops floating around in your brain. Closing those by writing down the priority for the next day. Step 1. Step 2, do what I call my 1-1-1 method, which is you take a blank piece of paper, sit down and write 1 win from the day, something that went well, 1 point of stress or anxiety, something you want to get off your brain and onto the paper, and then 1 point of gratitude, something you felt grateful for during the day. Science-backed, proven to improve your sleep quality at night when you do a little bit of journaling before bed. Takes 3 minutes, super easy. Last one is, when you're in bed, if you're struggling to fall asleep, do the 4-7-8 breathing method. You breathe in for a 4 count through your nose, hold it for a 7 count, and then breathe out through your mouth for an 8 count. If you do that 3 to 5 times, I guarantee you will feel calm and go to sleep.
Okay, that's great advice. I got 2 more for you. I practice all those. I go to sleep. I then figure out my financial wealth. I figure out my physical wealth, mental wealth, and time wealth. We're good. Social wealth. Now, someone like me, one of the issues I've had in previous relationships is I work too much, right? So I'm working, and then I will set time aside for like date night. But then let's just say like, it was the morning and they're like, hey, let's go do this from 1 to 4. I'm like, I can't, I have to do this, this, and this. And I often struggle thinking about the things you're talking about, like managing your time. That's more important, or the relationship side of thing, or maybe my mental health would be better if I took that time, but my financial health would hurt. For people that are parents, for people that are in relationships, struggling to find that balance, for people that their kids are saying, why couldn't you come to my game? What type of advice do you have for them in managing all that? Because that's a tough one, the work-life balance.
Yeah, very difficult. Look, there's a couple things. When it comes to relationships, there's an idea in the book that I love called doing a life dinner. So once a month, you set a fixed date with your partner where you have a life dinner, which is the idea that you go out for a date. It could be dinner, it could be coffee, whatever it is. And you have a plan to actually talk through some of the bigger picture things in your life. Each person sort of has an opportunity to talk about goals, challenges, things that are stressing them out, things that are going well, not going well. And then you kind of come together and talk about how you're going to solve some of those problems.
Okay.
It creates like a very casual but important cadence for actually checking in on some of the bigger picture things in your relationship and in your life, particularly after you have kids. Highly, highly impactful, because all of a sudden you lose the natural cadence of just interacting with the person because there's a child that you're trying to take care of, and that has drawn both of your attention. So life dinner has been a life changer for my wife and I post our son being born. When it comes to balancing time with children, I think the most important thing is making sure that your kids know the why behind why you are doing the things you are doing professionally. If you don't tell your kids why you are traveling, why you're working hard on things, why you're gone, they fill it with the worst, which is dad just doesn't want to be around. Dad doesn't care about me. And that's not true. You are actually grounded in something that matters to you. When you're working hard, it's because you are believing in something. You're trying to build something. You are, doing something that you think is important, or maybe you're providing for the family and that's important to you. Your kids need to know that, because they need to understand what the actual why is, not the bad version that they're going to naturally create.
Sure.
And then the last thing with that is like, presence is really important, but also your kids seeing you work hard on things you care about is a critical lesson that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. So while I agree that you need to be present as much as possible and give them your energy, it's also really important that they learn that hard work matters and that working on things you care about is something that they need to hold with them for their life.
I like it. A life dinner, and then showing through example. And I think the biggest thing that everyone can take away is the why, like just explaining the why. So, can't make it to 1 to 4. Here's why I can't, but here's where I can show up.
Highly effective with a partner too,
Yeah.
making sure they know the why.
I'm taking notes over here. I am taking notes. All right, the last thing, full circle. I brought up the help, hug, or herd model and the transition, talking about private equity. I want to bring it back to actually what it is. My listeners are like, what was he talking about? So talk to me about what the help, hug, or herd model is.
So when someone you love comes to you with a problem, you ask, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged? Basically, helped is actually helping them solve the problem, deconstruct, and then give
That's what I always do.
Yes.
I'm the problem solver.
I am a fixer.
Yeah,
so like,
same.
that is my natural disposition, is to try to fix the problem.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not always what the other person wants. And I have found that the hard way too many times in my love life with my wife, that oftentimes she wanted either to be heard or hugged. Heard being just listen and allow the person to vent, and hugged being provide comforting touch. Asking the person is a great way to make sure that you meet them where they actually need you to be in that moment. Not where you want to be, not where your natural disposition leads you to be, but where they need you to be in that relationship. Leads to dramatically improved relationships romantically or with friends. And after you've done it a few times, actually asking, you'll have a natural pattern in your mind where you'll know, okay, the person is venting, they just want me to listen. Or they actually do want a solution, maybe I should try to understand it and help them. It is a truly simple and transformative exercise.
And it's a way for everyone to feel heard. Like, it's just genius, or helped or hugged.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. Well, Sahil, this was unbelievable. It's so interesting to hear about what you've done, how you've done it, and from Stanford to the private equity world to your new book, The 5 Types of Wealth. For everyone listening right now, we are going to give 5 copies away. All you got to do is just go give us a review, your biggest takeaway, and put in your Instagram handle in our reviews, and you will be entered to win one of these 5 copies that we have. But we got to end with a trading secret. So what is one trading secret that you could give us that our listeners can't learn from a professor, although you did drop some professor nuggets? They can't learn through an Instagram, TikTok tutorial, or even a tweet. They can only learn through your life experiences. So it is one special trading secret.
Define what matters to you in your own life. Stop accepting the defaults of what other people tell you should care about. Really think about what you care about, what your true north is in your own life. Reject those defaults, and then start taking action to build your life around those things.
I like it. I like it. Define it for yourself. And my takeaway is that this episode brought me back to the Rob Dyrdek episode a little bit, where he was optimizing all of his businesses, and then he's like, I want to optimize my life. And there were so many hidden gems throughout that episode that people from 3 years ago still will DM me about. And I think that is what you're onto with this book and what you're doing, a transformative guide to designing your dream. It's been an honor to have you on and finally get to meet you. So Sahil, where can everyone find everything you have going on?
Well, you can find the book anywhere books are sold. More information at the5typesofwealth.com. And then I'm at Sahil Bloom on every major platform.
Sahil, thank you so much for being on this episode of Trading Secrets. It was an honor to have you on, and thank you for being on this episode of Trading Secrets.
Thank you.